Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Doctor is in podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nadia Sabeh, president and founder of Dr. Greenhouse. So, I'm about to start a new series of podcast episodes focused on energy in controlled environment agriculture. For the series, I'm going to be interviewing several different experts to talk about energy use in CEA, how we can potentially save energy and reduce our energy usage in our everyday operations. We're going to talk about utility incentives and rebates and funding opportunities to invest in energy saving technologies. And we're even going to talk about energy modeling and why it is such a big challenge to model energy use in a CEA operation. So I thought, just to sort of lay the foundation and set the tone for the topics and technologies that we're going to be talking about over the next several episodes, I wanted to just talk about energy and what energy is and how it relates to controlled environment agriculture. Okay, so number one, the first question to ask is what is energy? I am going to be asking all of my guests this question, and I have a spidey feeling that we're going to get a lot of different answers that are nuanced relative to, my guests' backgrounds and experiences and what they're doing in the field of agriculture around CEA. And, defining what energy is actually kind of hard. I think we all sort of have this innate concept of what energy is and why it's important and how we use it in our everyday lives. But even for Nobel Prize physicists, they've even had a really hard time in coming up with sort of a satisfactory answer to what is energy. There are a lot of different types of energy. There's thermal energy, electromagnetic energy, chemical energy, nuclear energy. It goes on and on. So, the way that I like to think about energy is in kind of two ways. One is that it is the stimulus for motion, as well as it is a source of heat, of thermal energy. And in CEA, we see that all around. So, we're stimulating motion. We might be stimulating the motion of a motor, like a literal, motile device like a fan motor, right? Or a compressor, something that is moving and creating work, doing work with the energy that we provide it. It could also be, sort of invisible to us, chemical energy, right? The energy that plants use to stimulate growth, right? So they actually use electromagnetic energy or light from the sun or from, our supplemental horticultural lights in a greenhouse or indoor farm. And that then stimulates electrical responses and chemical reactions within the plant, which is, right, the foundation for photosynthesis. And then the different types of energy that are in the air, the thermal energy, the heat and the moisture that's in the room or in the greenhouse, also affects, right, the rate of photosynthesis. It affects transpiration, which is how much then moisture gets delivered into or generated into the room's environment. And all of these, right, are sources and types and energy fields, right, that are just moving all around the plant, in the plant, and in our facility. And, really our goal in controlled environment agriculture is to manage, right, the flow of energy in and out of the plant, in and out of our room, in and out of our building and our site. So that brings me to the second concept, which is what is energy balance? Um, you know, really energy balance is kind of the bread and butter, I would say, of agriculture in general. Like I already described, right? Like the plant, it receives electromagnetic energy from the sun or from lights, which then, is the stimulus for photosynthetic activity, right? For growth and for, quality responses, and nutrient delivery through the plant. As an HVAC engineer, I think about energy balance all the time because I'm trying to balance the energy within the plant by balancing the environment around it. And so I'm constantly thinking about how heat moves in and out of the space, how moisture, which is latent energy, moves in and out of the space. And if we're really doing our job perfectly, right, then the amount of energy that goes into the space will be equivalent to the amount of energy that leaves that space. That is a zero sum sort of energy balance. Now, that is in a perfect world, and that doesn't really exist in nature, in physics, in real life. So, energy balance actually brings us to the third concept, which we will probably be talking a lot about, which is energy efficiency. What is energy efficiency? Well, energy efficiency is where we balance the inputs and the outputs, right? So it goes back to energy balance. But now, rather than summing to a zero, now what we're doing is looking at a ratio of energy. So, how much energy do we put in versus how much do we get out of a device, of a process, whether that's a photosynthetic process or an HVAC system process, with the goal that those two numbers are equal. Again, that the energy balance is equal, that inputs equals outputs. And if our input, which is the bottom of the ratio, is equivalent to the output, which is the numerator of the ratio, then we have a 100% efficient process. Again, in practicality, in reality, this is really not possible because we have losses throughout the system, right? So let's just think about lights, for example, right? Like lights use power, and there are going to be transmission losses through the wire that is delivering power, say, from the panel to the light fixture or from the panel to the driver to the light fixture, right? Every single step of the way, there are going to be losses. So the amount of power that we put into the panel is never going to be 100% of what gets delivered by the light, right? By the lamp fixture. So, but the goal is to get as close as possible. And that's one of the beauties about LEDs is that it really increases that efficiency of what we deliver is what we get out. So there's transmission losses. There's also frictional heat losses. So every time we run a motor, there it generates some heat, right? We have, if you have an HAF fan, if you put your hand up to the motor, you would feel heat coming off of it. If you walk next to a dehumidifier, right, we feel heat coming off of it. A compressor that's doing that refrigeration for cooling and dehumidification, we feel heat coming off of that. That is frictional heat loss just from the mechanical motion of that motor. And so, there are other sources of losses, but these are, sort of the primary ones that we think of when we are delivering energy in one form and trying to turn it into a different form, right? For a fan, it's we're delivering electrical energy and transforming it into mechanical energy. And right there, there's going to be a loss. So nothing can ever really be 100% energy efficient, but we want to get as close as possible. I also just want to introduce the concept of energy utilization efficiency. And what this really is thinking about the plant itself as the user of the energy input. So now let's say, okay, we have these losses going from, the panel to the driver to the light. But now if we think if we're the plant, right? Now our input is whatever got just delivered by the lamp, right? We don't care about the panel. We care about the lamp and the source of light that's beating down on us. And so now when we think about lighting, energy utilization efficiency, now what I'm thinking about is the plant and how much energy it's going to convert into biomass. And so, what we do with lights, right, is that we're trying to capture as many photons by the plant as possible that we deliver to it. And so we might have reflective surfaces, right? Some people are playing with under canopy light to try to get light up and into, the plant structure, and trying to increase the plant's utilization of that light. And of course, we're trying to achieve 100% of plant utilization. Of that energy. And so, if you think about it, all of a sudden, we went from the panel to the driver to the lamp to the leaf to the surfaces around, right? And so we get these overall losses of energy just even in the form of light. And again, there are many other, right, energy using devices and processes that are going on in a CEA facility. Okay, so the fourth concept is what is energy modeling? We're going to talk about energy modeling for CEA and why it is just so difficult. Now, we use an energy model, we develop energy models to try to predict how much energy is going to be used by a building in this case, right? A CEA facility. And we usually do that by breaking down the energy use by technology or equipment that's going to use that energy, right? That's going to try to balance the energy inputs and outputs of a CEA facility. And energy modeling is hard all the time, but it's particularly hard for a CEA facility. For so many different reasons, right? We have different equipment, we have different crops, we're in different locations, and different crop cycles, even within the same crop. And so, how do we actually come up with a baseline from which we can compare all other facilities, right? To say, are we doing good? Are we doing bad, right? Just as a sort of a qualitative assessment of that. But also in figuring out, like, how much can I expect to use, right? What can I expect my operating costs to be associated with power, with natural gas, in order to manage this controlled environment to grow whatever crop it is that I'm growing? Lights are going to be relatively straightforward because how much power each fixture uses, how often you're going to, run them, how many hours during the day you're going to run them, and you just basically multiply those two numbers together and you get it. But, if HVAC equipment is very complicated, right? There's a lot of different moving parts, a lot of pieces that actually are using energy. I mentioned the compressor, but you also have the fans, you have the controls, you have, the I don't what else do you have? You have a heater, right? An electric heater. And so there's a lot of components in figuring out like how, what are the dynamics, the thermal dynamics of a room? How can I predict when a compressor is going to turn on or a heater is going to turn on or the fan is going to turn off, right? Probably never. But it's a real challenge. And so, we want to talk about that. So, energy models are not just used to predict how much energy you're going to use with a certain set of equipment or technologies or building, but they can also help to identify energy saving opportunities, right? What if I insulate the building with R30 instead of R15? Can I save heating energy or cooling energy? What if I use LED lights instead of high pressure sodium lights? How much less electrical energy am I going to need to deliver the same number of photons to my plant? If I use, this HVAC system versus this other HVAC system, can I save energy by maybe investing in something that is, more expensive at first, but is going to save me money over time and have a good return on investment. So figuring out the energy modeling sort of challenge that we have is really at front of mind for a lot of folks in this industry. So, the fifth thing that we're going to be talking a lot about to sort of set the stage here is what are the sources of energy? Now, this is pretty related to the types of energy, right? I mentioned electromagnetic, chemical, mechanical, thermal, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of the same idea, but now what we're talking about is where does that energy originate, right? Where does it come from? And usually we break this down into two types or sources of energy: power slash electricity and fossil fuels. So electricity, right? It can come from the grid, it can come from on-site solar or wind power. Maybe you have a fuel cell on site, maybe you're even using a generator to generate electricity if you're maybe in a rural location or couldn't get enough power to your site to run all the lights that you want to run. So that is usually, your source of electricity. Now, for fossil fuels, usually we're talking about natural gas, propane. We've even done projects where we had number four fuel oil, though that is very rare. And the sources of that energy, right, can be the pipeline, right? So your utility has a pipeline. They're going to run it to your site. It could also be, a propane delivery truck, right? That is going to come by every 2 weeks or once a month to fill up your propane tank. And fuel oil number four, also I imagine you would have, some tanks on site that have to be refilled every once in a while, but is not going to come from a utility per se. So, utilities and governments are particularly interested in your source of energy for a few different reasons. One is because they need to know how much they're going to have to deliver to you, right? And as well as where you're located. So, do they already have the utilities in place that can feed you? That they can tap into fairly easily to feed you the 4,000 amps of power or however much natural gas that you need, or are they going to have to build some new infrastructure to support you? And we've seen that, of course, interrupt a lot of project schedules because, XYZ utility couldn't get a transformer out, for a year or 2 years. And so there are project delays because of that. They also want to know when you're going to be using energy. This is particularly true for electricity, though we also do see it for natural gas. But for electricity, we have, these peak demand times and these off-peak demand times, and those really affect your bill at the end of the day, your utility bill. So really it's, a question of supply and demand. If everybody needs power at the same time, then the prices are going to go up, right? Because there's, a limited amount of supply and there's a really high demand. And so, if you are using a lot of devices all at the same time, you're right, within a 1 hour period, then actually the utility will set your rate, a lot of utilities anyway, will set your rate based off of the maximum amount of amperage you use within 1 hour period of time in a given month. And so, it's really beneficial to figure out ways to sort of, distribute the amount of power you need over several hours or over the course of the day so that you don't get stuck into a high demand rate structure. Uh, the other thing is, right, consumption, right? Just how much energy are they going to have to deliver to you, right? Like, what is the size of the pipeline? What is the size of the transformer and the wires that they're going to need to deliver to you to meet your consumption profile? Not just, a peak demand, but also, right, in their thinking about all the different demands within their network, right? They need to make sure that they have enough first to supply everybody when they need it, but also that they have enough to supply you when you need it. Um, you know, the other thing I just want to say is that there are a lot of local jurisdictions and governments out there who have, um, you know, goals to reduce their carbon footprint, right? And so, they are really trying to find ways to reduce the amount of supply that they need to deliver to their customers, to their constituents in order to save, right, these resources for later. So if we can find ways to reduce our own energy use, then we are, reducing the demand on resources, and we are, fitting within the goals of our local communities, which to me is a win-win-win situation. Okay, so the last thing I just want to touch on is what units of energy are we talking about, right? What are the metrics that we use to measure and compare and analyze energy use data, right? Or just energy use consumption. So look, I just want to talk about a few units because I know we're going to be talking about these units of measure in these conversations coming up. Okay, so the first unit of measure is a kilowatt, which is a kW, and this is a measure of electrical energy demand, right? So all of you who have lights in your facility, right, you know that each fixture has a certain number of watts, and you need to deliver a certain amount of wattage to run all those lights at the same time. That is your electrical energy demand. Now, the utility looks at all forms of energy demands, whether that's lighting, pumps, fans, HVAC, right? Your office equipment, all of that is going to get lumped into that KW, that power demand, which again, like I said earlier, usually impacts your utility rate structure. Okay, now a similar measure of energy demand is the BTU per hour, or the British thermal unit per hour. And this is a measure of your thermal energy demand. So this is an HVAC system, right? So we might talk about how many BTUs, really we mean BTUs per hour, does your system need to be sized for, right? What is the load? How many BTUs per hour? Is it 1,000 BTUs per hour, 100,000 BTUs per hour, which we then lovingly convert into tons, which is from the olden days when 1 ton of ice was equivalent to 12,000 BTUs of thermal energy that it could absorb in 1 hour period of time. Um, so same thing. A kilowatt is a BTU per hour is a ton. It's just how we use those metrics to define different types of energy demand. And I'm going to throw one more at you, which is a horsepower. And horsepower is focused on mechanical energy demand, right? A motor, an engine, something that we would think of back in the day as being pulled by a horse or many horses in order to create a certain amount of work or energy output. Again, it's the same type of energy. And when the utility looks at kilowatts, they are literally converting all of that energy, what we might have sized an HVAC equipment to have so many BTUs per hour, and this fan motor to be this horsepower, and these lights to use this kilowatt. It all gets converted into kilowatts when it goes back to your utility. Okay. The second type of energy metric is consumption, right? And so we just talked about demand. Now we're going to talk about consumption, which is the kilowatt hour. So how much power are we using over a period of time that is equal to our energy use or energy consumption? And so the utility will also charge you, right, $1 per kilowatt hour, right? So the national average is like 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Out here in California, we're like 18 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. If you're in Washington, it might be 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And in Hawaii, I don't even want to think about how high their um uh dollars per kilowatt hour is, but it's very high. And so, at the end of the day, when the utility sends you a bill, they say, okay, this is your demand charge, and then this is your consumption charge for all the energy that you used in this past month. But here's the other thing is that there's a nuance of time of use. So it's not just how much energy you used, over a 30-day period. It's what time of day did you use that energy, right? Because like I talked about just a moment ago, right? There's this supply and demand exchange going on. And so if you are consuming energy when everybody else is consuming energy, your cost is going to be higher than if you are consuming energy during off-peak times when other people maybe are sleeping and they're not using energy. And this was really the impetus for why we saw so many facilities attempting to operate, their farms overnight, right? During the nighttime periods, so that they could reduce their energy costs associated with running lights and HVAC, etc. However, I think most of those operations quickly determined that it was very prohibitive to finding people who wanted to work from, the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. shift. So I don't think there's a lot of operations that are running 24/7 or only running their lights at night to save energy. Probably the labor costs ended up exceeding what they would have saved with energy costs because people probably would have demanded a higher salary, I'm guessing. Okay, so, with that note, that's the foundation for what we're going to be talking about for these next several episodes, really. In CEA, energy is the second highest operating expense after labor. So finding ways, right, to reduce our dependence on energy and reduce the costs associated with energy is really a benefit to our entire industry, right? Not just to be more profitable, but to just be profitable, right? Energy is proving to be so costly that we're seeing a lot of facilities, fold because they just can't, sell enough product to pay those utility bills, let alone their people and everything else. And so, what I'm hoping with these next few episodes is to open up the conversation, broaden it to everyone, the entire CEA community, as well as stakeholders that serve or are interested in CEA and energy use, to figure that out, right? To figure out what we can do to reduce our energy use, reduce our energy costs, and really move towards productivity and profitability within CEA. If you liked this episode, please give us 5 stars and give us some comments as well, your thoughts about energy in CEA and what topics you're hoping that we're going to cover during this special series. And, it should be fun and I hope really informative and move the conversation along so that, we can all make this industry as successful as possible. All right, thanks.